All right, guys. So for this lecture, we're going to take a little bit of a look at how the kidney processes or essentially makes urine. Okay. So urine formation is actually broken up into three processes: filtration, reabsorption, and then finally secretion. And each one of those processes, we've got a different step or different things kind of being processed along the way. So let's look at filtration first. This is our only non-selective process, which is also passive. What actually happens here is water and some solutes, so things that are dissolved in the water that are smaller than proteins, can actually be forced through the capillary walls. So when we look at this diagram over here to the right-hand side, you see blood's coming in this way, and then blood is going to take an offshoot through this glomerulus inside of that Bowman's capsule. So as things make their way across into the capsule here, that's where we're talking about this process of filtration. So things come through here, pass out into the ureter, all right, and then the blood makes its way along, and then through the rest of the nephron. Okay, blood cells at this point aren't small enough to pass out of the capillary. All right, so we shouldn't see blood in the urine. If we do, we have some sort of damage inside of the kidney or things. And then the filtration is collected in the capsule and then leaves through the urine or the renal tubule, which is this one here. Okay. So that's filtration. Reabsorption then is going to happen in the capillaries, where the capillary is actually reabsorbing several materials. So this actually happens down here at this point right here. So things are then reabsorbed back out of the renal tubule back into the blood vessel. So things that can do that is water, glucose, amino acids, and some ions. So like potassium and calcium ions at this point. Most of the reabsorption is active, but there are some of the processes that are passive. So water, because it's fairly small, can easily pass across this if we have a small enough concentration gradient. So that would mean there's less water in this blood vessel. All right, person might be dehydrated at this point, and then they're just going to simply reabsorb that water back into the blood vessel. Um, most reabsorption is going to happen in this proximal convoluted tubule. So again, here's your Bowman's capsule. This is the proximal convoluted tubule leading out here. So pretty much most of that is going to happen right here at this point. Okay. Materials that we can't reabsorb are things like urea, uric acid, and creatine. So those things can't pass across these membranes from the tubule into the blood vessel here. Okay. And then um, excess water. So if there's not a concentration gradient here, so if it's equal on both sides, water wouldn't be absorbed. The last step then is secretion. So this is where we have the reabsorption in reverse. So anything that was not pulled out can be taken back out of the capillary or the blood vessel back into the urine ureter here. All right. So some of the material that can move that direction are hydrogen and potassium ions. So if there's too much here in the blood, those can simply be passed across. And then if for some reason the filtration didn't catch any of the creatine, some of that can be passed across. One of the things that used to be brought up a lot, and we don't see it as much today, but a lot of times athletes were taking large amounts of this creatine um, to try to help with muscle healing. So creatine, we know, is found in muscles, right? And we know that its purpose is to help muscles regenerate. So athletes were using creatine supplements to try to kind of aid that process along a little faster. So what was actually happening here is people were getting very dehydrated because of this large amount of creatine uptake. Again, we don't see as much of it now. I think probably saw more of it when I was in undergrad, which would have been somewhere back in the early 2000s. That's when creatine really kind of hit the market. But what happens then when this large amount of creatine is in the bloodstream, it would be reabsorbed at this point right here, but it would also pull water that direction as well. So athletes would start to cramp up. They start to have issues with performance because of the cramping, and they would have a little bit of some muscle degradation just because there was way too much creatine in the system. Okay. This just shows the basic formation of urine. So this shows the whole nephron right here. So you've got your Bowman's capsule or glomerular capsule here. You got your proximal tubule. All right. This is the loop of Henle right here as well. You have your distal tubule, and then finally this is the collecting duct, and then the ureter. Okay, so if you look at it here, you can see where some of those substances are absorbed and then reabsorbed, or sorry, filtered out and then reabsorbed. So most everything gets filtered out here at the point of the proximal convoluted tubule. Right, so you can see we've got salts, potassiums, any kind of things in the bloodstream that really shouldn't be there, right, are coming out here at this point. You can have water then reabsorb back into the system here through the loop, right? And then salts as well can be reabsorbed back in. Then the distal convoluted tubule, you can see most of our drugs and other things like that can be filtered out. And then anything that goes into this process is being reabsorbed. Okay. Characteristics of urine here that we should see, especially for medical diagnosis. So it should have a color to it. Should be somewhat yellow. Shouldn't be dark yellow, but it should be somewhat yellow. Most people say apple juice is kind of the color that you kind of are looking for. If it has a very dark hue to it, we're probably looking at some of a destruction of blood vessels at this point, because once you destroy those blood vessels, then they can pass across into the urine. It should be sterile for the most part, unless we've got some sort of an issue here. Okay, has somewhat of a smell to it, and this is mostly because of the urea and ammonia that is in it. Should have a pH of around 7, so it's actually somewhat acidic. And specific gravity should be somewhere between 1.01 and 1.035. In athletic training, we actually use specific gravity when we do hydration testing for wrestlers. So a hydrated person should be about 1.25. Oh, sorry. I think I pushed the wrong thing here. That's not what I wanted either. Okay. And so anything above or below that, we start to look at the person not being hydrated, which is one of the ways wrestlers cut weight. They usually dehydrate themselves. So if they're very dehydrated, then it's not a healthy weight for them to be at. So they want the wrestlers to be hydrated as well as cut weight. Okay. Composition of urine. So these are all the things that normally should be found in urine. Obviously, water, urea, uric acid, ammonia, some bicarbonates. All right. Creatine, and then there should be some electrolytes, sodium and potassium in there. Things we should not find in urine, and these are things that if we find them in urine, then we know that we have some sort of an issue. So red blood cells should not be in there because they're too large to pass across that Bowman's capsule. Hemoglobin, so any parts of blood. We shouldn't see any white blood cells or bacteria or pus. That tells us we have some sort of a urinary infection or kidney or bladder infection. Glucose should not be found in there unless you've got some sort of an issue with diabetes. Proteins as well should not be found in that. And then bile is another thing. So any one of these, if we find it in urine, we tend to then wonder if the person has some sort of an issue someplace. Other things that can be found in urine, we talked a little bit about this in the reproductive chapter. So HCG, so the human chorionic gonadotropic hormone, that's the one secreted by the fetus, developing fetus, as well as the placenta. And then that tells us that we find that in urine, the person is most likely pregnant. Okay. The last thing here, real quickly, is renal failure or kidney failure. So this is where the kidneys no longer filter that substance for us. So these people have to go on what they refer to as a dialysis treatment. If they don't do that, then all of those byproducts that we know that shouldn't be in blood then end up in the blood, and they cause damage to our system. So the person has to have their blood filtered to pull those out, and it has to happen pretty regularly. So usually at least a couple times a week, if not at least once a week, depending on the level of kidney failure that they have. But if they don't have that done on a regular basis, then we end up with some issues. And that has to continue until the person usually receives a new kidney. You only need one kidney. You don't actually need both. They are paired organs. They work much better if you have both of them, but you can function with one. I actually had a kid that I used to coach in baseball when I first started teaching that was born only with one kidney. It was a freak genetic issue that for some reason his other kidney did not form. So he was left with one kidney. Because of that, though, he was not able to play like contact sports. So he was told not to play soccer. He was told not to play football because if he damages his other kidney, then we're running the risk of being on this type of dialysis. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there.